In February 1996, Garry Kasparov played a 6-game match against the IBM computer Deep Blue. For the scientists behind the Deep Blue computer, this was the culmination of a project which had started in 1988 in Carnegie Mellon University, and this was then taken on by IBM in 1989. And at that point, the computer's name changed from Deep Thought to Deep Blue, which was a combination of the original name, Deep Thought, and the IBM corporate nickname, Big Blue. So Deep Blue it is. And, well, in 1994, Deep Blue had won the World Computer Championship, and it had also defeated Judith Polgar in a mini-match. So clearly this was a serious opponent for Kasparov. And this was probably a good time for Kasparov to throw his energy into this match, because he didn't have a World Championship match looming. At that time there were great politics in the chess world, just as now, but there was a split in the World Championships. So he has no World Championship match coming up. He'd kind of taken on the next generation after Karpov in the early 90s. He defeated Nigel Short in a World Championship match, and in tournament play he had overcome the younger generation of Ivanchuk and Gelfand, for example, and he still reigned supreme in the chess world, but computers were obviously the next challenge for him. But he was pretty confident. He said, in serious classical chess, computers do not have a chance this century. I will personally take any challenge. Well, he talked there about serious classical chess, and in fact this 6-game match was played under the standard tournament time control of 40 moves in 2 hours. I think Kasparov, through his experience in the Intel Grand Prix series, which is of course rapid play, he realised that rapid play, well, he could come unstuck against the computer, which he did in 1994, as we've seen in one of our videos. There was a $500,000 prize fund, and originally Kasparov had insisted on a winner-takes-all of this pot. IBM had offered a 60-40 split for this $500,000, but in the end they compromised, and it was 80% for the winner and 20% for the loser. But I think it's so interesting how confident Kasparov was when he wanted a winner-takes-all of this 500,000 pot. And yes, what else have we got? The Deep Blue computer was running on 256 parallel processors. So we saw that Richard Lang's Chess Genius software was running on one Pentium processor. So Deep Blue, 256 parallel processors. Now, just the architecture of this is an extraordinary feat, to get these processors running together. What this meant was that Deep Blue could, through sheer brute force calculation, could go much deeper in its calculations. But many people were saying that its evaluation function was not as sophisticated as Richard Lang's Chess Genius software. So the question was, could the Deep Blue team turn this kind of quantity of analysis, of examination of chess positions, into quality? Game 1 started on the 10th of February 1996. Deep Blue with the white pieces. And, well, a very standard opening. C3, not seen very much at the elite level. Frankly, seen as not a very dangerous option. And Kasparov played one of the approved moves against this opening. Bishop g4, this has a very good reputation. So before playing e6, the bishop develops, and black has enough time to do this. These moves are very standard. We get into a typical isolated queen pawn position, but a pretty favourable one for black, considering that this bishop on c8 has already developed and can put pressure on d4, but it just gets out of the way basically. And now bishop e7 had been played before, and this is satisfactory for black. But Kasparov played bishop to b4 instead, which is much more ambitious. So this bishop might at some point exchange itself off for a knight on c3, that's possible, but it also might just drop back around here to put some pressure on that d pawn. So it's a more ambitious move. This got knocked away, but obviously this is not a critical position yet. I'll kind of stop and pause and look at the position deeper when we get to a more critical phase in the game. The queen comes back, and knight b5. Well, in fact, if black wants to play a very safe move here, queen d5, just coming back again, is very safe, of course. The c7 square is covered by the bishop. And probably the best that white has in this position is just to repeat moves. But of course, that was not in Kasparov's mind. He played queen e7, and this was clearly all part of his preparation. Knight e5. So, okay, good active move and very typical. The knight hits the outpost, supported by the pawn. So, bishops traded and castles. Now, this is one of those typical IQP positions where, because the light squared bishops have been traded, very often this light square bishop is a potent attacking piece on one of these diagonals. But in this case, bishops exchanged, and if black can sink a knight in on d5 successfully, then he will have a clear positional advantage. But bishop g5, good move, fighting against that. So this pin is obviously a little bit uncomfortable for black because this bishop is way across the other side of the board, and no possibility to break that pin. So tricky position, but Kasparov seemed to be comfortable here, and I have no doubt that this was all part of his preparation. These moves are, well, very obvious for both sides, actually. Bishop b6, good move, putting pressure on the d-pawn. And here, well, white would very much like to play knight g4, with some pressure here and breaking up the king side. But in this case, black can actually take on d4, and there's no harm. Black is just a pawn up there. But good move from deep blue here. Exchange on f6, and obviously queen takes f6, not good because of the knight fork. So Kasparov has to compromise. G takes f6. And once again, if the knight goes to g4, then white can actually take on d4 safely. But the knight came to c4, and this is an excellent move. First thing, little tactic, d-pawn can't be captured because there's a check on g4. So Kasparov played rook d8, so just putting a bit of pressure here. And now the bishop was exchanged on b6. Okay, this needs to be defended, rook fd1. And now, good move from Kasparov, f5. So that prevents any queen g4 check, so prevents the queen coming to the king side, and makes room for the queen to come to f6. Good move. More pressure on d4 and can cover the king as well. So, about this stage, looked satisfactory for black. But now deep blue played a couple of excellent moves. Queen e3. So this is really good stuff. The queen looks in this direction, but also looks towards b6. And this is a very good decision. Kasparov played queen f6. There's not much he could do about what happens next. And black's position is actually still fine. And now d5. This is an excellent positional move. So giving up this isolated queen's pawn So that was taken. And now white has to be a little bit careful for a moment because that's under fire. So queen b6 would be met by queen takes b2. So first of all, and this is a real computer move, deep blue played b3. Now I understand the desire to not to lose this b pawn, but why b3? Any human would have played b4 so that this pawn is protected. Now, it's quite possible that it was to do with covering the c4 square. There might be some obscure variation where the knight at some moment manages to come in here. But it's a very computer move, it's not a human move. Interestingly, now when you run this position through bits of software, most of them prefer b4 actually here. Anyway, b3 played. And the queen is now hitting b6, and black's pawns look like an utter mess here. Yeah, I mean, all completely isolated. So we're seeing, as I said earlier, quantity turning into quality, because this deep calculation has resulted in, well, a position for black where his structure is very poor indeed. Objectively, still not bad for black actually, but for any human, and particularly Kasparov, with strong positional sensibilities like any top player, slightly worrying, because if this goes wrong for black, then it's disgusting. But black is still alright here. We now saw a typical Kasparov move. He's looking for counterplay. He wants to hit the g-file and attack white's king. And for any human being facing Kasparov, this would be terrifying. In fact, this move, rook d8, allowing white to take on b6, and then rook d7, it's actually very solid. The rook holds these pawns. In some circumstances can support the d-pawn advancing. The queen defends the king very well. And black has sufficient activity and solidity here. Be fine for black. So, but king h8, yeah, typical Kasparov. Deep blue took on b6, and now rook g8. So this is the point, going for counter-attack. And of course, one shouldn't play queen takes b7 here, because queen g5 will hit g2 and the rook on c1. So queen c5 played, good move, protecting the rook, and perhaps looking at this pawn here. And this is a really critical moment in the game. It's very, very complicated, really complicated. Kasparov played the wrong move here. But let me show you a few variations, and you can see how confusing this might have been for black. Let's look at f4. Well, okay, it looks like a very obvious move. And by the way, the machines, when you run this through them, f4 is approved. Rook d8 is also approved. I'll come on to that in a second. But let's look at f4, because it's a very obvious counter-attacking move. Well, queen d5, not good hit, because after f3, queen h6, that's tricky, hitting the rook and hitting the pawn. So king h2 is obvious. Now rook d8. So this is a switch. The attack on the g-file isn't going to work because the rook can simply cover here. But you can just switch back to protecting. And black is okay here. But let me give you a few variations that show how complex this position is. d3, for example, would be a mistake, tactical blunder. Queen f8 is mate. Queen g6 is a better move, but in playing a move like this, you would have to calculate that, in fact, black is still okay after this. It's tricky. In fact, I mean, this is a mad variation, absolutely mad. if queen e6, then it's still mate on f8, and queen takes d1. Well, this is actually a draw. Now that's check. Obviously king g8 allows queen g7, but rook d4, this is a very computery variation. This saves the day. Queen d5, threatening mate, and black's best is to come back here, blocking, and this is a draw. Repetition of position, and so on. Incredible variation. As I said, rook d8 is also satisfactory, and if queen b6, then this is a way that the players could make a draw, actually. Anyway, that's another story. d4 was a blunder. Knight d6, and you can see that this is very dangerous for black. f4. And now here queen d5 is a very obvious human move, covering on the king side and hitting here. Probably good for white. Knight b7 is even stronger, and this is an extraordinary move, not human at all. Threatening to take the knight, but the white's knight is now miles from the king side, but incredibly this shows the depth of calculation. Deep Blue was able to see that white can still spend the time to take this pawn and yet still bring the knight back in time to prevent any counter attack. Let me show you this variation. Kasparov played knight d3 here. He's probably lost here already. But if queen f4, well, I mean, this looks absolutely terrifying, hitting these two. If king h2, this is a mistake, because, well, after this, well, if this is taken, then of course queen d2 check and mate. And after this, that's check. Threatening a mate, and this is going to be the end. It's going to be mate very soon. But after queen f4, white has rook c8. Now I can imagine this is a move that Kasparov would have missed. And if rook takes, then pawn takes queen. And if queen g5, still very tricky, but rook c5 is a winning move. This is such a tactical position, very complex, and this, I think this game shows how strong Deep Blue is in this kind of straight calculating. Rook c7. Well, I'm going to zip to the end now because basically Kasparov is lost here. I mean, there are various tries, but it's just not working. I'll show you the end of the game. Kasparov is one move from mate. He's threatening mate here, but Deep Blue some time ago was able to calculate that white gets in first. And I mean, these moves aren't very difficult. The only difficulty is seeing them a long way ahead. And here Kasparov resigned, because if king g6 and then knight f3 prevents the mate, because the king has g2 as a square, and then, well, mate will follow shortly. After the game, Kasparov said, well, he was completely shocked. He said, "I made some mistakes, but the most important one was getting into a wide open position where raw computational power shines." He also said, "In certain kinds of position, it sees so deeply that it plays like God." So he was shocked and also impressed. But that was only game one of this 6-game match, and I'll show you what happened in the other games in a further clip.